When I think back to the day it all began, the day I realized my family would never see me as anything but a disappointment, I remember the smell of roasted turkey, the clinking of glasses, and the sharp sting of humiliation I tried to swallow with each forced smile. That reunion wasn't just another gathering, it was the day my parents decided to ban me their own daughter from the family table. Not because I had sinned, not because I had betrayed them, but because in their eyes, I was simply too poor to be worthy of sitting beside them. I grew up as Olivia Morrison, the youngest of three siblings, the quiet one, the one who never quite fit into the glossy image my parents wanted to project to the world. My father, Robert Morrison, had made a fortune in real estate, building a small empire of luxury condominiums. My mother, Elaine, was the perfect hostess, the kind of woman who seemed born to smile in photographs, to wear diamonds effortlessly, to glide across a ballroom as though she owned it. My brother Nathan became a banker just like father had always wanted, and my sister Grace married into old money. Her husband's family ran a shipping company that practically printed wealth. And me, I was the one who chose differently. I didn't want to sell houses or marry into riches. I wanted to build something of my own. I loved hospitality, the art of making people feel at home, the delicate balance of elegance and comfort. When I was 24, I walked away from the investment banking job my father had practically shoved into my hands and poured everything I had into my first boutique hotel. It was a broken-down building with peeling paint and squeaky floors, but I saw beauty in it. I saw possibility. But to my family, all they saw was failure. "You gave up a six-figure career for this," my father had spat the day I announced my plans. "Do you think you'll be anything more than a glorified innkeeper?" My mother shook her head, disappointment etched into her perfectly smooth features. "Olivia, our name means something in this city. You're dragging it into the mud with hostels and cheap motels." And so the divide between us grew. At first, I tried to prove them wrong. I invited them to see the renovations, to meet the guests who thanked me for giving them a home away from home. But they never came. My calls went unanswered. Holidays passed with only token invitations that arrived too late to attend. And when the family reunion rolled around last year, I showed up with my head held high, only to find my name missing from the guest list. Grace had cornered me in the foyer, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Liv, didn't you get the message? This reunion is, well, it's for family who contribute, you understand, right?" Her words had gutted me. For family who contribute. I wanted to scream that I had built something from nothing, that my hotels might not yet be skyscrapers, but they were mine. I wanted to tell her about the nights I worked until dawn scrubbing floors alongside my staff, because I refused to let them shoulder it alone. I wanted to tell her that money wasn't the only measure of worth. But the laughter floating from the banquet hall behind her told me everything I needed to know. They didn't care. And so I left, banished, shamed. But what my family didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that the seed of betrayal they planted that night would grow into something much larger than themselves. Because while they laughed at my poverty, I was quietly building an empire they would one day beg to be part of. The months after that reunion were some of the hardest of my life. I poured every ounce of anger, every shard of heartbreak into my work. My boutique hotel became not just a building but a sanctuary. Guests left reviews calling it a hidden jewel, an oasis, the kind of place you never forget. Slowly, word spread. Investors began to notice. One deal turned into three turned into seven, and before long I was standing at the helm of something bigger than I had ever dared to dream. I rebranded myself. I became Liv Carter, the name I used for all my businesses, clean and sharp, free of the Morrison shadow. By the time the LC Hotels logo went up on buildings across 3 cities, my name was whispered in boardrooms, admired in magazines, respected in circles my parents thought I could never enter. But I never told them. I let them believe I was struggling, scraping by. I let them laugh behind closed doors about the daughter who had thrown away her future. Because deep down I wanted this moment, the moment when truth would pierce through their illusions like glass shattering against marble. That moment came sooner than I expected. A few months after opening my flagship hotel downtown, I received a gilded envelope in the mail. Inside was an invitation engraved in thick gold script: Morrison Family Reunion, a celebration of legacy. I almost laughed. After banning me for being too poor, they suddenly wanted me back in their precious circle. Part of me wanted to tear the invitation in half, but another part, the stronger, quieter part, smiled. Because this time, I wouldn't be arriving as the invisible daughter. This time, I would walk through those doors not as Olivia Morrison, the girl they cast aside, but as Liv Carter, the woman whose name now gleamed from the very building where they planned to host their reunion. Yes, they had chosen one of my hotels for their celebration. The irony was almost too delicious. I arrived that evening dressed simply but elegantly in a black dress that whispered sophistication without screaming for attention. My heels clicked against the polished marble floors. As I walked through the lobby, I had personally designed the cascading chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the scent of lavender I always insisted on diffusing in the air. Every detail bore my fingerprint, and yet none of them knew. Not yet. As I stepped into the grand hall, the chatter of my family filled the air. Glasses clinked, laughter rang out, and all eyes turned as the doors opened. For a moment, silence fell. I saw the flicker of recognition on Grace's face, the tight clench of Father's jaw, the forced smile that spread across Mother's lips. "Well," Grace said finally, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "look who decided to show up." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried secrets. You could say that. Inside, my heart pounded with anticipation. They thought they had won when they banished me. Tonight they would learn just how wrong they had been. I moved through the foyer like a ghost returning to haunt the living, my reflection slipping across panes of glass and polished steel as if the building itself were quietly greeting me. The staff saw me, of course. They always did. Their eyes lifted, and in that subtle flicker, I read warmth, recognition, and the oath we shared in public spaces we pretend. They offered the same measured smiles they gave any guest 1 degree warmer for me, but they did not bow, did not say my name. Not yet. Tonight we were staging a slower kind of truth, one that required the patience of a good meal and the precision of a fuse burning down. Grace swept toward me first, all fragrance and frost, the kind of woman whose bracelets made their own entrance. The sight of me pricked her composure, but she smoothed it with practiced ease. She leaned in for the air-kiss dance, barely grazing my cheek, as if kindness were a luxury she couldn't quite afford. "You look well," she said, as if wellness were something I had borrowed without permission. "We didn't expect you to feel comfortable here." Here, as if the lobby and I were strangers. I let the word pass through me like wind through a curtain. "I'm comfortable," I answered, and the sentence tasted like a promise kept to an older version of myself, the one who used to tremble outside rooms that smelled like this, that sounded like this, wondering which part of her would be weighed and found wanting tonight. Mother glided over her smile, lacquered and luminous. She had perfected the art of appearing softer than her judgments, of delivering verdicts in a velvet voice. "Olivia," she said with the careful cheer of a host reclaiming a guest who had strayed, "you look tidy. I suppose that's something." Then, pivoting smoothly, she added for the small cluster within earshot, "We've chosen such a dignified venue this year, so elevated. The Morrison standard never disappoints." I almost laughed. The Morrison standard? She meant chandeliers like constellations and staff who moved like choreography linens pressed so flat they looked ironed by light. She meant a room that reflected her back at herself, flawless, curated, adored. She had no idea she was standing inside a cathedral I had built to honor a different gospel entirely. That hospitality could be holy. That a person could be held by a room the way a hand cups a flame. Father descended last, not because he had been occupied, but because he enjoyed being the punctuation to any scene. He carried approval like a currency, and had always exchanged it at poor rates with me. He looked me over the way he inspected a property during a final walkthrough, calculating the repairs he'd require before signing off. "You're late," he said. "If you intended to make a statement, don't. The evening isn't about you." Then, as if granting me a favor, he placed a cold kiss at the air near my temple. "Try not to stir the pot tonight." As if the pot hadn't already been boiling for years, the doors to the grand hall opened and a tide of relatives and their satellites flowed inward. I followed at a measured distance, savoring details only. I truly knew the way. The brass rail along the mezzanine caught the light at dusk, the faint lavender note braided with orange peel in the air. The precise pitch at which our string quartet tuned between songs calibrated to comfort without sedating. I watched as family friends applauded the space itself, as if it had arranged its own flowers and negotiated its own contracts. Flawless taste, one woman declared to another, and I wanted to whisper thank you, but my voice remained sheathed. Let them collect their compliments. The building and I were patient. At the threshold to the ballroom, I paused, absorbing the view I had dreamt long before I could afford to build it. Velvet drapes pooled like night at the ankles of the windows. Tables glowed beneath glassy domes of candlelight. The ceiling's coffered squares held tiny constellations of luminaires, a galaxy cooperative enough to obey dimmer switches. A ripple moved through the guests, the little collective exhale humans make when they feel safely dazzled, and it pierced me with equal parts pride and ache. How many times had I pleaded as a girl to be allowed at a table like this, without being told to be quieter, smaller, grateful for crumbs? How many times had I folded myself to fit the napkin ring of their expectations? Grace and a small court of cousins arranged themselves near the stage, basking in an imaginary spotlight. She had always been the family's favorite narrator, and she began the evening with anecdotes polished to a flash, the legacy of the Morrisons, the home's father restored to splendor, the philanthropic wing mother chaired, as if kindness were a boardroom. I kept to the periphery, a habit that had once been my sentence and had since become my sanctuary. From the edge you see the whole frame. Servers floated with champagne like bottled starlight. My staff's ballet was so seamless I could relax into it. My maitre d' caught my eye across the room, a brief flicker of understanding passing between us. Not yet, his expression said. Soon. The tempo of a reveal obeys its own mathematics, and tonight needed to crest naturally. The first course arrived citrus-cured salmon, with the barest hint of fennel and a thread of herb oil so fine it looked painted. Compliments fell like confetti. Exquisite, impeccable, divine. Mother glowed and collected each praise as if it were a bead on a rosary. "We do have a legacy to uphold," she murmured, just loud enough for the adjacent table to overhear. "The Morrisons have standards." I felt the familiar sting that came whenever my last name was used as a ladder I had not been allowed to climb. Yet beneath it was another sensation, newer, a steadiness like bedrock. I had not merely learned to bear rooms like this, I had learned to build them. Father stood to speak after the second course, his voice swelling with the bourgeois sermon he loved to preach. He praised resilience, by which he meant his own, told a few jokes engineered to make wealthy people feel brave, and concluded with a toast to family prosperity and legacy. When glasses lifted, I noticed his gaze tilt past me as if unwilling to admit I occupied the space between his words and the floor. Then came the part the Morrison clan loved most, the honoring of achievements. Grace read names from a list, allowing her own to linger when it arrived. Grace's new townhouse, Nathan's promotion at the bank, Aunt Marianne's foundation surpassing its annual goal. Applause swelled and receded as predictably as tide. Between items, she riffed, tossing sparkling crumbs of gossip, letting laughter smooth over the sharp edges of class. I braced myself the way you do when you recognize a road you once fell on. "And Olivia," she announced at last with a smile shaped like mercy, "has joined us tonight. Isn't that lovely? We're so pleased she's doing well." She fluttered a hand. "Let's give her a warm welcome." The applause that followed was polite, tepid, the sound of people clapping for a child who managed not to drop her milk. Heat touched the back of my neck, but it faded. I understood something in that moment I hadn't been able to admit when I was younger. The praise of people who refuse to know you is a counterfeit currency. It spends nowhere worth going. I stepped away from the applause like stepping out of a drizzle and took a quiet lap around the room, touching the edges of my own work, the banquette upholstery, the curve of the bar, the bevel of the mirrors. Tangible proof. Not of money, though, there was that, but of imagination made durable. If legacy meant anything clean to me, it meant leaving behind objects and spaces that made strangers feel like their lives were worthy of beauty. Between dessert and coffee, the temperature of the evening shifted. Not the literal temperature, the climate control was perfect, but the vibe, the pressure in the room that makes people take stock of who they are in relation to the nearest chandelier. My general manager entered, cutting through the throng with elegant certainty, pausing to check on an elderly guest's chair height, exchanging a phrase with the sommelier that recalibrated a pairing for a table with allergies. If leadership could be danced, she danced it, and watching her filled me with that electric blend of relief and gratitude that only comes when you trust someone with your name. Grace began her closing a sentimental spin about the Morrison spirit. She gestured grandly toward the vaulted windows as if to say, "Behold what our family commands." It was almost time. My chest thrummed with a low drum beat, not nerves exactly, more like alignment, the feeling of a lock turning when the right key finally meets it. The plan was simple because truth often is. No theatrics, no pyrotechnics, no public scolding that would turn pity into a weapon against me. I wanted a reveal that would honor the people who had built this place with me, who had stitched our brand into experience without needing credit. I wanted my family to collide with reality without me having to push. Mother lifted her glass for the final toast. To legacy, she declared, eyes shimmering. To the Morrison name, and to the buildings that bear it. May our future be as bright as our past. There was a hush those few seconds when a room leans forward, anticipatory before sound returns. I glanced up at the mezzanine. My front of house supervisor stood beside the brass rail hand poised near the switch that controlled the lobby marquee. We had recently upgraded it, elegant, discreet, visible from the ballroom through the arched entryway, if the angle was right. It would be right. I nodded. Almost imperceptibly, he nodded back. Across the room, my maitre d' shifted the band's set list with a small gesture, 2 minutes of softened strings, then silence. The pastry team emerged with a final flourish, small chocolate plaques on silver stands at each table, embossed in gold leaf, with the words we printed for special private events. Except tonight, one word would differ. I took my place near a column, not center stage, not hidden either. I wanted to witness rather than perform. When the band's last note dissolved, the lights eased 2 shades warmer, and a collective sigh rose, that involuntary contentment a good room can summon. Then the lobby marquee blinked once, then again, then flowed to steady life. From where I stood, I could see the script unfurl on its clean black field, tall letters dressed in brass. LC Hotels. Liv Carter. The syllables settled into the air like a bell that chose not to be ignored. Heads turned instinctively toward the archway, toward the glow beyond. A ripple traveled table to table, confusion first, then curiosity, then recognition in those few guests who read trade publications or loved a good city story. I felt rather than heard the intake of breath at my parents' table. Grace squinted as if the light had dared to contradict her. At that precise heartbeat, the chocolate plaques were set down, 100 tiny nameplates of sugar and gold catching the candlelight, saying without volume what the room had not known how to hear. LC Hotels, host of the evening, owner of this building, steward of this experience. LC Hotels, me, in elegant shorthand. No microphone, no declaration, just a current moving. I watched the realization assemble itself on faces I had memorized since childhood. Mother's smile faltered, repaired itself, faltered again as it searched for a version of events that would keep her at the center. Father's brows knitted into the expression he wore when numbers refused to obey. Grace turned toward me slowly, as if pivoting too fast might make truth arrive quicker. Our eyes met. I did not say a word. In the quiet afterward, a few guests began to clap, hesitantly at first, then with a sincerity that warmed the edges of the room. Someone near the bar murmured Liv Carter, trying the name out like a vintage they hadn't realized they already loved. My general manager approached my parents' table, bent slightly, and thanked them for choosing LC Hotels. The sentence had no edges, but it sliced cleanly through illusion. Father lifted his glass and put it down without drinking. Mother's hands folded and unfolded around her napkin, as if searching for a rosary. Grace touched the golden plaque at her place setting and left a crescent-shaped fingerprint in the chocolate. I wanted to reach back through time and take the hand of the girl I once was to show her this moment. No groveling, no rage, only presence, and say, "You did not need to be louder. You needed to be truer." The applause grew, then faded, replaced by a new kind of noise. Questions, introductions, the murmur of people adjusting their maps of the world. A cousin approached me with cautious awe, then retreated when he saw my parents' thundercloud faces. Friends of friends drifted nearer the way people move toward a fireplace. I stayed where I was, shoulders relaxed, a small gravity smiling to itself. It struck me then with a clarity that steadied my breath. This was not revenge at all. This was geometry. I had simply stepped into the center of a circle I drew for myself, and the room had no choice but to redraw its lines. The applause scattered like startled birds fluttering awkwardly before falling into uneasy silence. People were murmuring now, some excited, some confused, others glancing at my parents for cues. But no one could unsee the golden lettering glowing from the marquee in the lobby or the chocolate plaques resting at every plate, spelling out the same undeniable truth. LC Hotels. Liv Carter. The air vibrated with recognition. Some guests leaned toward one another with whispers. "That's her. The Olivia they used to talk about. She owns this." Their disbelief was almost sweet, like dessert you hadn't expected but secretly craved. My mother's smile cracked into fissures, her eyes darting around as though searching for an escape hatch. My father's jaw clenched so tightly that the tendons along his neck strained like ropes about to snap. Grace's painted face paled the shimmer of her eyeshadow, now an ironic echo of her lost shine. I remained still, letting the silence speak for me. And then slowly, deliberately, I walked toward the stage. My heels rang against marble steady, unhurried the rhythm of inevitability. Every eye followed me, each step tightening the coil of tension in the room. Grace fumbled with her note cards, unsure whether to continue speaking or yield. For the first time in her life, she didn't know how to control the room. I reached the stage and gently took the microphone from her hand. My fingers were steady. My voice, when it emerged, was calm, not trembling with rage, not cracking with shame, but smooth, sure, resonant with a truth long denied. "Good evening." The word was simple, but the weight behind it shifted the air. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn by something they hadn't expected. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I continued. "This reunion has always been about family legacy and the pride we take in our name. But tonight, standing here in this building, I realize legacy is not something inherited. It's something created." I paused. My eyes locked on my father's, then my mother's, then finally Grace's. Each of them tried to mask their discomfort, but their bodies betrayed them. The twitch of a lip, the tightening of shoulders, the subtle widening of pupils. When I was younger, I said I thought being a Morrison meant being part of something unshakable. But as I grew, I learned the hard truth that in this family, love was measured not in kindness or loyalty, but in money, in titles, in appearances. If you didn't fit their image of success, you didn't belong. I was told I was too small, too unambitious, too poor. So poor, in fact, that I was banned from sitting at this very table. A ripple went through the crowd. Several guests gasped outright. The shame my parents had tried to bury in me now sat in the middle of the room, undeniable. But here's the thing about being cast out. I went on, my voice softer now, confessional. When the people who should love you turn their backs, you either break or you build. And I chose to build. I built something they couldn't take from me, something they couldn't control. I built an empire with my own two hands. And tonight, you are sitting inside it. A hush settled over the ballroom. Even the chandeliers seemed to pause their light, holding still as if in reverence. This hotel. I gestured around us. Every detail you admire, every comfort you enjoy. It carries my name, the name I gave myself when I no longer needed theirs. LC Hotels, Liv Carter, that is me. Gasps broke out again, louder this time, followed by a swell of applause. Some stood clapping with genuine awe, while others hesitated, torn between loyalty to my parents and the magnetic pull of truth. I let the applause wash over me, but inside I wasn't basking in victory. I was steadying myself, reminding myself that this moment wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the years I had lost to silence. I turned back to my parents. My father's face was a storm contained only by force of will. My mother's eyes glistened, though whether with anger or shame I couldn't tell. Grace Ever, the actress, forced a laugh that landed flat in the thick air. Olivia, she began, but I raised a hand, silencing her. I know you wanted this evening to be about the Morrison legacy, I said. But it already is. Because what you tried to erase, what you dismissed, what you called worthless, has become bigger than you could ever imagine. And now the world knows it. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls like thunder. Guests began turning their backs on my parents' table, pivoting instead toward me, eager to align themselves with the power they had just witnessed. My cousins, once smug and superior, now looked uncertain, their eyes flicking between me and Grace like gamblers unsure where to place their bets. And in that moment, I saw the truth clear as day. I didn't need their approval. I never had. All I had needed was the strength to stop asking for it. I handed the microphone back to the host, stepping down from the stage with deliberate calm. My team, who had waited silently along the walls, moved subtly to fall into step behind me, a living testament to the empire I had built. As I passed my parents' table, I stopped. I leaned down just enough so only they could hear. This is the last time you will ever underestimate me. Then I straightened, turned, and walked out of the hall. The applause followed me, spilling out into the lobby like a tide that refused to recede. The applause still echoed faintly when the ballroom doors closed behind me. But silence fell as soon as I stepped into the smaller antechamber that connected to the main lobby. My heels clicked on marble, and the sound felt louder now, more solitary. I had made my declaration. My empire was no longer a secret, and the room had chosen sides. But I knew my family well enough to expect they wouldn't let me leave without a final confrontation. Sure enough, the door swung open again. Grace was the first to storm in, her face twisted with disbelief and rage. The sweet socialite mask was gone, replaced by the sharp edges of someone whose world had cracked. "You humiliated us," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done, mother and father?" The door banged open once more, and my parents swept in like a storm cloud. My father's jaw was set so tight I thought it might shatter. Mother's face was flushed, her composure unraveling, her hands clutched into fists at her side. "Enough," father snapped. His voice boomed against the high ceiling. "Whatever game you've been playing, it ends tonight." I turned slowly, meeting his glare with calm. "This isn't a game. This is my life, my work, my empire. And you walked into it without even realizing you were stepping into the world I built. You dare speak to me like this?" His voice rose, a whip crack of fury. "After all I provided for you, after you spat in my face by leaving the bank, you think owning a few hotels makes you my equal?" "Not your equal," I said softly, the words cutting sharper than any scream. "You're better. Because I didn't need your money, your name, or your approval to build what I built. I did it alone." My mother's voice broke in, then brittle and cold. "Alone. You disgrace this family, Olivia. You've turned a reunion into a spectacle. Do you think these people respect you now? They're laughing behind your back. You've made us a joke." I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice so she couldn't mistake my sincerity. "No. The joke was pretending your approval made me valuable. The joke was letting you convince me for years that I was nothing. But tonight the only people laughing are those who finally see through you." Her face crumpled, her perfect mask dissolving. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes, not of me, but of losing the control she had clung to her entire life. Grace's voice cracked, rising higher. "You think this makes you powerful? You'll always be the girl who scrubbed floors, the girl who begged for scraps of attention." Maybe, I admitted. "But that girl learned something you never did, that the floor can teach you more about strength than the ceiling ever will." My father slammed his fist onto the marble ledge nearby, the sound reverberating like thunder. "You shame us. If you think you can sever ties with this family and survive, I already have." The words landed heavy, final. For a moment, even Grace fell silent. I stepped back, straightening my shoulders. "You banned me for being too poor. You cast me out as if I were disposable. And in doing so, you gave me the gift of freedom. Without you, I built something greater than your name could ever hold. So tonight isn't about me severing ties, It's about me acknowledging that they were cut a long time ago. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's face was crimson with fury, his chest heaving. My mother swayed slightly, as if her pearls had become too heavy to bear. Grace's lips trembled, her eyes darting as though searching for a way to undo what had been said to rewrite the scene. But truth once spoken cannot be recalled. The ballroom door opened again, and my general manager appeared, her expression calm but firm. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice carrying just enough to remind my family that this was no longer their stage. "Your car is ready." I nodded, then looked back at the three people who had shaped my life with their cruelty. "This is the last time I will explain myself. The next time you hear my name, it won't be in whispers of shame, it will be on buildings, in boardrooms, in places you'll never reach. And every time you see it, you'll remember this night. The night you tried to erase me, and I became unforgettable." My father opened his mouth to retort, but the words caught in his throat. My mother looked away, blinking rapidly. Grace folded her arms tightly as though hugging herself against a chill no one else could feel. I turned on my heel and walked toward the lobby. My team fell into step behind me, a living wall of quiet loyalty. The chandeliers above glittered, casting golden light that followed me like a crown I had earned for myself. The doors to the outside world opened, and cool night air swept in crisp against my skin. The city lights stretched out ahead, reflections of my own resilience, each one a reminder of the empire I had built brick by brick, scar by scar. I paused for a final moment, glancing back over my shoulder, not with longing, not with regret, but with clarity. "Goodbye," I whispered. And then I stepped out into the night. The night air kissed my skin as I stepped outside, cool and alive with the hum of the city. For a moment I simply stood there, breathing it in, letting the quiet settle over me like a balm after the storm. The hotel's facade loomed behind me, my name gleaming across it in bold, golden letters. It was more than a building. It was a monument to every tear I had shed, every insult I had swallowed, every long night I had worked until dawn with nothing but stubborn hope to fuel me. The car door opened, but I didn't step in right away. I turned back to take one final look. Through the tall windows, I could still see shadows moving inside, the flicker of figures, the ripple of conversations now turned in new directions. They would talk about me all night. They would argue, deny, justify, and twist. But none of it mattered anymore. Because tonight, the balance of power had shifted forever. For years, I had longed for their recognition, their approval, their pride. I had thought those things were oxygen necessary to breathe. But tonight, I discovered the truth: I had been breathing just fine without them. I had built an empire not because of them, but in spite of them. And that realization was worth more than any applause, any inheritance, any hollow compliment they could have offered. The drive through the city felt different that night. Each streetlight cast a glow that seemed to whisper back to me, "You did it. You are free." I watched the buildings pass by, remembering the years I spent feeling small in their shadows, believing I could never measure up. But now some of those buildings bore my name, and the others, they would soon enough. But beneath the triumph there was also grief, a deep, lingering ache that no victory could erase. Because despite everything, they were my family. And some part of me, the little girl who once tugged at her mother's dress for attention, who once beamed at her father's rare nod of approval, who once shared secrets with Grace before money sharpened her into something cruel, still wished for a different ending. Still wished they had chosen love over pride. That girl would always live inside me, a shadow of what could have been. But tonight, I honored her by refusing to let her be defined by their rejection. I honored her by standing tall in a room that once silenced me. I honored her by choosing myself. When I reached the private terminal where my jet awaited, my staff moved efficiently, their quiet respect wrapping around me like armor. One of them handed me a folder of upcoming meetings, expansion plans, investment proposals, charity initiatives. Real work, real legacy, the kind that mattered. I sat in the lounge, sipping a glass of water, staring out at the runway lights stretching into the horizon, and I thought about legacy. Not the brittle kind my parents clung to, built on appearances and empty applause, but the kind that grows quietly, steadily, in the lives you touch, the spaces you create, the dignity you give to people who need it most. For me, that was the true meaning of revenge. Not watching them squirm, not humiliating them in return, but living so fully, so unapologetically that their attempts to erase me became irrelevant. The best revenge wasn't destruction, it was survival, success, and freedom. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the city fade, and then I opened them, ready for what came next. Because my story didn't end with them. My story was just beginning. And to you watching, listening, maybe carrying your own scars, I want to say this. You don't need their approval to matter. You don't need their applause to prove your worth. You don't need to stay small just because they told you that you were. If you've been laughed at, dismissed, made to feel invisible, remember me. Remember this night. Remember that the girl they called too poor to sit at their table now owns the building that holds it. Remember that you are stronger than the voices that belittle you, and louder than the silence they trap you in. And when your moment comes, and it will, don't waste it proving them wrong. Use it to prove yourself right. If this story spoke to you, if it stirred something inside you, I invite you to stay with me. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe for more stories of betrayal and survival, and leave a comment with your own truth. Your voice matters more than you know. This is not just my story, it could be yours too.